He was a quiet one, the spiritual soul of the Beatles. While Lennon and McCartney basked in most of the limelight, George Harrison quietly carved out an identity all his own within the band. But behind that placid exterior seethed a deeply submerged resentment one few could have ever imagined. So, who did George's secret anger focus on? Was it a attention-hogging bandmate, a manipulative manager tugging the strings from behind, or someone far more unsuspected? Today, we pull the curtain back on the most complex and arguably most surprising relationship in Beatles history. There was a grudge beyond the music and fame that could change forever how we view the Fab Four. Buckle up as we expose the truth on the man George Harrison hated most. While the songwriting rivalry of John Lennon and Paul McCartney is well documented, there have been whispers over the years of another prickly relationship. This time, it focuses on George Harrison and the man with whom he supposedly shared the most intense hate. The struggle for power and creative decisions within the band often created tension, especially for Harrison, who felt he deserved much more recognition and a say in the band's concepts. After all, he was always in the shadow of Lennon and McCartney. But prior to that, let's go back to the very start. Early life. George Harrison was born on February 25th, 1943 at 12, Arnold Grove in Wavertree, Liverpool. He was the youngest of 4 children to Harold Hargreaves Harrison and Louise Harrison. Harold was a bus conductor, who earlier had been employed as a ship's steward with the White Star Line, while Louise, of Irish Catholic descent, was a shop assistant. He had 3 siblings, an older sister, Louise, and 2 elder brothers, Harold and Peter. According to Boyd Harrison's biographer, his mother Louise paid great attention to her children's happiness, and George's love for music was one of them. George Harrison's mother, Louise, had an avid love of music and a voice that could shake the windows, often startling visitors to the Harrison household. During her pregnancy, she often listened to Radio India, enjoying the mystic sitars and tablas, in the hope that the exotic music would soothe her unborn baby. Biographer Joshua Green wrote, "Every Sunday she tuned into mystical sounds produced by sitars and tablas, hoping the exotic music would bring peace and calm to the baby in the womb." The Harrison family initially lived at 12 Arnold Grove, a modest terrace house in Wavertree, Liverpool, where George spent his first 4 years. The house did not have any modern facilities. There was an outdoor toilet, and only one coal fire provided heating. In 1949, the family relocated to a council house at 25 Upton Green in Speke. When he was 5 years old, George attended Dovedale Primary School. He passed the 11+ exam and later attended Liverpool Institute High School for boys from 1954 until 1959. Though the school did offer a music course in its curriculum, George was saddened by the lack of guitars and felt stifled during his education. The formative early musical influences on George Harrison were indeed broadly diversified. Artists like George Formby, Cab Calloway, Django Reinhardt, Hoagy Carmichael, Carl Perkins, and Lonnie Donegan influenced him during his 1950s childhood. A pivotal moment occurred in early 1956 when, riding his bicycle, he heard Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel playing from a nearby house, sparking his fascination with rock and roll. Even while in school, Harrison showed his love for music. He used to draw guitars in his school books, saying, "I was totally into guitars." Slim Whitman was another major influence that he knew either through a magazine or television. Thus, his interest in the guitar was strengthened. The practical side of Harrison's musical education started when he was about 14 years old, and his friend Raymond Hughes offered to sell him a guitar. His mother, Louise, eventually bought it for £3.10, which would be approximately £110 adjusted for inflation in 2024. A family friend taught him some basic tunes, such as Whispering Sweet Sue and Dinah. Inspired by Lonnie Donegan's skiffle music, Harrison formed a skiffle group, the Rebels, with his brother Peter and friend Arthur Kelly. It was during this time, on a bus to school, that he met Paul McCartney, marking the start of a lifelong friendship and musical partnership that would shape music history. Early career. In March 1958, George Harrison auditioned for John Lennon and Paul McCartney's skiffle group, the Quarrymen, at Rory Storm's Morgue Skiffle Club. Lennon, at first, thought Harrison, who had just turned 15, was too young. However, McCartney arranged a second audition on a Liverpool bus, where Harrison impressed Lennon by playing the lead guitar part for Raunchy. He then began socializing with the group and eventually became a full member. Against his father's wish for him to stay on, Harrison left at 16 and took up an apprenticeship as an electrician with Blacklers, a locally owned department store. During the Quarrymen's first tour of Scotland in 1960, Harrison used the stage name Carl Harrison after Carl Perkins. This was the very first trip he took with the Beatles, the beginning of it all, and of course, his guitar playing and musicianship were very much a real factor in the development and eventual success of the Beatles. In 1960, under manager Alan Williams, the Beatles booked gigs at the Indra and Kaiser Keller clubs in Hamburg, run by Bruno Koschmider. This was their first Hamburg residency, where they developed their musical talents within the dynamic club scene. Still underage, Harrison was deported because he was legally too young to work in nightclubs. In December 1961, Brian Epstein took over as the manager and polished their public image. He then signed them with EMI. Their first single, Love Me Do, went at number 17 on the record retailer chart. The following year, their debut album, Please Please Me, launched them into global fame as Beatlemania swept the world. With his reserved and introspective stage demeanor, Harrison was often called the Quiet Beatle. This was certainly evident in 1964 when the Beatles came to the United States, as Harrison was sick with strep throat and a fever, and on doctor's orders he rested his voice until their appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. Harrison's reserve contrasted with the others, who generally were outgoing and certainly never turned down the opportunity to speak their minds. Thus, he was a quiet Beatle. Musically, he became more active with time. On the first album, he had 2 lead vocal credits, including the hit, Do You Want to Know a Secret? His second album with the Beatles, 1963, had 3 lead vocals, including his first solo writing credit, Don't Bother Me. Harrison also did some scouting of American releases, especially in soul music. On Rubber Soul, 1965, he directed the band toward folk rock influences from the Byrds and Bob Dylan, while exploring Indian classical music. He played sitar on Norwegian Wood. Harrison later said that Rubber Soul was his favorite Beatles album. Revolver, 1966, demonstrated Harrison's skill as a songwriter and innovator, including the songs Taxman, Love You To, which also featured sitar and tabla, I Want to Tell You. His tambura on Lennon's Tomorrow Never Knows furthered the group's experimentation with non-Western timbres. Harrison's Indian music and spiritual interest grew stronger, and his sitar work on Norwegian Wood was a respectful use of Asian culture in pop music. By Revolver, the album, he had earned himself the nickname the Maharaja of Ragarok, with songs like Love You To. His fascination with non-Western instruments carried over onto Strawberry Fields Forever with the Swar Mandel. On Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, his spirituality came to center stage with Within You Without You, as well as sitar and tambura. The jacket cover reflected his interest in Eastern gurus. Harrison felt that Sgt. Pepper was both a milestone and a burden. His Indian music explorations also led him to influence the Beatles and Western culture. In January 1968, he recorded The Inner Light in Bombay with local musicians. It was his first Beatles single about Hinduism and meditation. Later that year, during sessions for the White Album, tensions reached their highest. Ringo's star briefly quit. Harrison contributed While My Guitar Gently Weeps, which featured Eric Clapton, as well as the upbeat Savoy Truffle. Inspired by Bob Dylan and the band at Woodstock in late 1968, Harrison felt a need for creative freedom, which brought him into conflict with Lennon and McCartney. During filming for Let It Be at Twickenham Studios in early 1969, he left the band on January 10th, frustrated with the studio setting and interpersonal tensions. Harrison reunion with the group after a brief departure in January 1969. Harrison returned 12 days later, when the Beatles agreed to move the film project to Apple Studio and abandon McCartney's plan for a public performance. Relations improved, but tensions remained during the recording of Abbey Road. Harrison supplied Here Comes the Sun and Something, and, for the first time, achieved equal songwriting status with Lennon and McCartney. Something became his first A-side release on a double A-side with Come Together, topping charts in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and West Germany, and reaching number 1 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100. Frank Sinatra recorded it twice in 1970 and 1979, calling it the greatest love song of the past 50 years, and Lennon considered it the best Abbey Road song. In May 1970, Harrison had his second U.S. number 1 single with For You Blue, coupled with McCartney's The Long and Winding Road. By that time, Harrison had accumulated a substantial number of unreleased compositions, reflecting his increasing creative output.